Friday morning. Join the discussion.
Earlier today, House Democrats spoke with reporters after their meeting with the acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Thomas Homan. They talked about concerns over recent apprehensions and deportations of undocumented immigrants around the U.S.
We want to make sure that we have sufficient time to answer questions. As many of you know, we've just finished a bipartisan meeting with Acting Director Tom Homan of ICE, and the purpose of the meeting was to get answers to questions about the recent activity in terms of apprehensions, detainments, and deportations. I'm going to defer to many of my colleagues, but my reactions are as follows. One, I'm still gravely disappointed, and quite frankly, I'm very concerned about the precedents just about the context of this meeting. That never in anyone's career, no matter how far back I go, that when any member, let alone the chairperson of one of the caucuses, one of the largest sub-Democratic caucuses, asks for a meeting early to prevent panic, confusion, fear, to weigh in a productive, coordinated, where we can, manner, and to offer protections, real protections to our community, that meeting is canceled and redirected and under the control of my Republican colleagues in the House, which sends a chilling message to the Hispanic Caucus that the Hispanic Caucus was disrespected, was not included, and has not been given ample opportunity to write to do what we need to do as policymakers and as constituent representatives, as duly elected, which is an interference in our jobs. And I stand before you, our caucus will continue to demand answers, demand meetings, and at the end of this meeting, Acting Director Homans did say that the entire caucus would have a meeting with Director Homans, and I will make sure that that happens in short order. My second quick observation is that we don't have the information here that we need, but there is a general sense that, in fact, they recognize that with the changes in this administration, that all immigrant communities are at risk for these actions. And with that, I want to hand it over to former chairwoman and vice chair of the Democratic Caucus, my colleague, Linda Sanchez from California.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for your interest in this issue. We just concluded a meeting with the acting director of ICE where there were a number of questions that were put to the acting director about the recent removals and the scope, in particular the scope and the breadth of the new executive order. And the takeaways from that meeting are essentially that under the new executive order, the universe of people who are priority for removal is greatly expanded. And in fact, I believe that all would be at risk. And they said that we can and should expect many more arrests and removals this year. So it's clear that the broadening of the executive order is meant to give more discretion and greater ability for removals and apprehensions. And my sort of extrapolation was that with the current resources that they have, that is the only thing that is limiting them in terms of who they choose to remove. We were disappointed that did not have all of the information, that they did not have available to us all of the information that we requested. They have agreed to try to get us the information as we requested it in specific categories of information that they did not have with them at the meeting today. And if there was one positive thing that we did walk away from that meeting with, was a commitment by Acting Director Homan that if there are any verified incidences of ICE abuse, he will report those to the Inspector General. So there is at least some commitment to ensure that when they do these removal actions, if there is abuse, that will be reported. And I wish I had better news for our communities in this country. But unfortunately, the administration has taken a turn from where our past commitment to immigrant communities has been. And with that, I will invite Benny Thompson, the ranking member of the Homeland Security Committee, to give his thoughts on how the meeting went today. Benny.
Thank you very much. I agree with everything my colleagues have said. There are a couple other points I'd like to highlight. This executive order parallels the Muslim ban executive order in that there was very little guidance that went to the field. And so you have people around interpreting what they think the guidance is. A request was made for that guidance to be provided to members of Congress so they could look at it. It was conveniently not available at the meeting, and I think part of the discomfort a lot of us felt is that there were a number of questions that did not get answered that we would have expected them to have. There was a comment about the DACA recipients and whether or not they are at risk with the various raids. Well, we were told no, but it's with certain conditions. And so that discomfort we felt, along with a lot of people around the country, is perhaps the guidance is not as clear as it should be. But again, disrespecting members of Congress by not coming forth earlier, meeting with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus is not good. They have significant interest in what goes on. The other thing is whether or not their communities have been disproportionately targeted for these removals than other places. So a lot of questions are on the table, but this was an opportunity to begin the process of oversight in terms of what's going on. And I now yield to...
No, we're just going to take questions now. Okay.
I just want to clarify something first. I have two questions. But I want to clarify, who was invited into this meeting and who exactly was excluded?
Let me just say that this meeting was unique and that I've never seen anything like it, only one like it, and hopefully never again. At the request of the Hispanic Caucus, which was to ask questions which are of concern to the Asian Pacific American Caucus as well, at the request of the Hispanic Caucus, there was supposed to be a meeting 2 days ago. Right. They canceled the meeting and said, we're just having meetings that are bipartisan. And so this was to be that meeting. But the sad part of it is that the administration would determine which Democrats would be invited to the meeting. This is highly unusual, as you can imagine. And then we had to fight and this and that to make sure that the representatives that we needed to have in the meeting would be there, and still we couldn't include, for instance, we couldn't include somebody from the Asian Pacific American Caucus. We couldn't include other members of the Hispanic Caucus. So we were very disappointed. They did expand it, though, to include on the Judiciary Committee, for example. At first it was just Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Jim Clyburn, Benny Thompson, and John Conyers. Not anybody from the Hispanic Caucus, until we, shall we say, explained to them that that was not going to qualify as a meeting. But we were fortunate that in addition to Mr. Conyers, Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, who has been an immigration lawyer, who has taught immigration law, who has been chair of the Immigration Committee, was there to subject them to some questions.
So who was excluded today from today's meeting?
Everybody. I mean, there's never been a meeting like it. Let me just say this. Ordinarily, if there's a limitation on time or space or something, the speaker will say, this many people are going to be there, this number of Republicans, this many Democrats, you bring who you bring.
Okay. Also, my real question was also, just thank you for the preliminaries. Did they give you any indications on how many people they have rounded up and deported so far?
So do you want to
I believe it was about 686 was the total number.
Yeah.
So since the Trump came into office?
Since the executive order was
686.
I need to say it's this. I think the number says 683 total.
Oh, 683.
And they identified that that's the result of 5 cities, but what we're seeing in the news and we're collecting as representatives is that it's greater than 5. So, for example, I know that there was ICE action in Las Cruces, New Mexico. That's not included in that number. And I should tell you, I know that this will be shocking to hear that apparently there is fake news about who is being covered and where they're being covered. So there isn't anything going on outside of churches or outside of sanctuaries or in other places that are not typical for these kinds of actions. And so we disputed that for a bit.
What were the 5 cities they said the actions were in?
So let me see if I get it right. So, and I may have to do the states. L.A. Area primarily in California, the Carolinas, New York, Georgia, Austin, Texas primarily. San Antonio area.
The cities, Atlanta, Chicago.
But and Chicago was included, but I don't know that Georgia was. But there are many other communities like Denver, cities in New Mexico that were not included in this number. So we're not getting what we need.
Did they explain if these people who were rounded up were dangerous criminals? Did they give you a list of felonies?
Yes. Mr. Hoyer, did you want to speak to that?
I have a list with me, but the answer that is yes. Do you?
Well, they've given us a list, and it includes traffic offenses, trespassing, in certain, as well as some serious crimes that no one would disagree about. As well as 112 people who they acknowledge had done no criminal activity at all.
Can I make a point on that? Because I said this in the meeting, and everybody here agrees. Somebody who has committed a serious crime and is here without authorization, nobody on this stage believes that they ought not to be removed as a priority.
That's what Obama did.
That was consistent with the Obama policy. What we understand the present policy now is essentially to extend the exposure to all people. But I will tell you, we had a discussion because there are 176 non-criminal on the list, which is it's 110 and 62 or 64 others. We're not sure exactly what that distinction is, but there are 176 listed as non-criminal on that list.
Following up, how many of those people were DACA recipients? Did they know that number?
No,
They didn't have specific numbers on DACA recipients, which is part of the information we have requested.
However, they did represent that DACA qualified were not targeted.
Yeah.
Did they give you any information going forward about what magnitude you're going to see in coming weeks? Or
It was hard to leave that meeting and not. I'm Congressman Joaquin Castro. I represent part of Texas, San Antonio. It was hard to not leave that meeting and believe that the Trump administration is going to target as many immigrants as possible. The only hesitation they seemed to have was whether they would go after DACA recipients. There have been a few cases in the news where it's clear that they have picked up a few DACA folks. They have claimed that those individuals had some other offense attached to them, so that they weren't just DACA recipients, they had done something else. Aside from that, everybody else is fair game for them.
And I might add, they're only constrained by the resources that they have in terms of who the priority is.
We have votes that we have to go take. Thank you.
Just one last question.
Well, let me just say, and following up on what was said then, when they said there are potentially 11 million people who meet the standard for deportation by their expanded rules. The prosecutorial discretion is uneven in the country as to how this is all enforced. And the resources that would be needed to apprehend and make judgments about these people are enormous. You have to ask yourself as a country, of course we want everyone who is a danger to our community to be dealt with, deported, if if that's the case. But it doesn't mean that we instill fear into our country, that we allocate enormous resources instead of spending our time, energy on passing comprehensive immigration reform, which would solve a great deal of this. Because for over 8 million of these people, even 11 million in many cases, in most cases, it's just a visa, it's just a status violation. Now, if they've committed another crime, then they have to go. But it's millions of people, just a status violation, and that shouldn't be the grounds for us to allocate the resources instead of making the time to pass comprehensive immigration reform. Thank you all very much.
Was the President's news conference today?
We were in this meeting.
Thank you.